Apologies to you and to Mr. X, who's our next witness, for there having been a slight technical hitch this morning, which meant that we've started a little late. As I've indicated by calling him Mr. X already, he is giving evidence anonymously, and therefore the usual order will be made. Let me tell you what it is. The name and address of witness W2137, Mr. X, to you and me, and any other identifying information such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W2137 must be referred to only as Mr. X. The order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order during the course of the inquiry by making a further order. With that introduction, may we have Mr. X, please?
Shall I sit down? Sure.
Mr. X, your full name is known to the inquiry. Could you please repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely...
I do solemnly and sincerely...
and truly declare and affirm...
and truly declare and affirm...
that the evidence I shall give...
that the evidence I shall give...
shall be the truth...
shall be the truth...
the whole truth...
the whole truth...
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mr. X, in 1976, you had an accident. Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, I was working as a logger in the forests of sort of Dumfries and Galloway, chainsawing and sort of snedding and felling, and I had an incident with a log that had came down and got lodged in another tree, and it went a bit wrong, and I sort of grabbed the branch, the very large branch, and wrenched my left groin area during that mishap.
You had to have surgery.
Yes.
Which took place on the 26th of May of 1976.
Yes.
What kind of surgery was it?
It was a left inguinal repair.
And you've been left with a sizable scar, 6-inch scar?
That's correct, yeah.
What do you recall being told by the surgeon after you came round following the operation?
Drowsy as I was, my mother was there one of the few times she could attend because she lived in a small town not too far away, but in those days there was very little buses, but she was there with me, and the surgeon came round and had said that there had been a minor complication and that everything's absolutely fine and okay, but there was an administration of so many units of blood, and 3 units of blood was what I remember, and it's what my mother remembered as well, was 3 units of blood was administered during that complication of the procedure.
And in the days that followed on the ward, there was some friendly banter with you and the nursing staff. Can you tell us about that?
I mean, yeah, banter it was. It was purely, good fun, and they had said that, the blood was from America, and I would start to speak in a Yankee Doodle accent, so I did, much to the consternation of the nursing staff for a few days. And they said that, there was other bits of banter that I would have to, drink 3 pints of Guinness to make up for the poor blood that came from America, because it wasn't good as quality as good old Scottish blood. I mean, it was kind of banter like that, and my mum was present when that was happening for that part of the time she was there, and nothing more than just friendly comical banter.
And how was your recovery from the operation?
It was. I found it very difficult being a young, fit man, and the nursing staff and everyone said that I was putting it on and milking it a bit, but I really was in agony and pain. I couldn't lift my head up. The muscle tension, so as soon as I lifted my head up, was very sore, and that there was a lot of bleeding in the wound, and there was a lot of pain. I had to get administered with painkillers. And I was kept in extra time at the hospital for that recovery. At one point, I was wheeled next door to the next ward to visit this gentleman who was 76-year-old who had the same operation as me on the same day, and he was up and walking. And they said, well, if he can do it, you can do it. And I remember that. So it must have been something to try and encourage me to get up and try walking and get moving. But I found I couldn't do that for many days. And unfortunately, the gentleman died the next day, so I hoped I wasn't going to go through that experience at the age of 18.
We've got your discharge letter, 2137002.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that refers to you being admitted for the surgery. It refers to you making a satisfactory recovery and being allowed home on the 3rd of June 1976.
Yes.
Is it right that you went directly home, or did you go to further recovery first?
Yeah, no, I was. It was kind of my first of my negotiation skills with the hospital that I wanted to get out of the hospital I was in and go nearer home so that my friends and family could visit me, but they wouldn't allow me to go because I had a longer period to recover for whatever reason that was. And I went to the local for that recovery. That was the deal that was done, that I would go there for, I think I was in total in hospital for 12 days, I think 4 days, 5 days in the and 7 or 8 days at the main hospital where I had my operation.
And whilst this letter doesn't refer in its text to you having any transfusion, you have a clear recollection of the doctor telling you so after the operation and of the conversations that followed with the nurses in the way you've described.
I do, yes, yeah.
And the handwritten addition we see on the letter, App had 3 units of blood. That, as I understand it, is an addition made in 2002 by your then GP following discussions you had with that GP.
That's correct, yeah.
Could we also have up on screen, please, Paul, 2137011? And it's not a very clear document,
no.
But this, as I understand it from your statement, Mr. X, is your GP notifying the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh of your operation in November 1976 when you moved to Edinburgh in case you needed any further care arising out of it.
Yes, yeah, there was some sort of very sort of light fluid coming from the wound for many months after, so this may have been in relation to that.
And you got on with your life, you worked, you had a partner, you had 2 children.
Correct. Still have.
Mountain climbing and triathlons became one of your great passions.
Yes.
But around 1997, you were starting to feel unwell. What can you tell us about that?
The recollections I had when I was doing preparation for triathlon competition was that, you'd be obsessed with your times, swimming, running, cycling. And I felt that my timings were going down. I wasn't achieving what I wanted to achieve for the competitions. And I felt that after each sort of hard training session, I would just feel absolutely wiped out and exhausted. I was young at the time, and I did have a sort of quite a good social life, so I was out, in the town. And I probably drank too much at that time, but I remember as well that the next day, after a few pints, I would feel just absolutely awful with a raging hangover that would sedate an elephant. And all my friends, seemed to be in good shape and good form when we went out for our early morning sort of 10-mile run. And I would be lagging behind, and I just felt that I had really no energy, and I couldn't keep up the level that I know I was capable of.
So you went to see your GP, and what were you told first of all?
Well, she done checks, etc., and blood pressures and all that kind of thing. I mean, again, she just said I'm probably training too hard and drinking too much, and everything's fine. You know, that my heart and everything was in excellent condition, and just cock-anny a bit, and, you know, leave off drinking too much and don't push yourself into the ground by training too much and working too hard.
But the symptoms didn't go away or get better, and so you went back to the GP a while later.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. That was triggered with a bit of a panic attack after a session on, I think I was trying to do a half marathon at the time, and I collapsed halfway through, and I just went into a bit of a panic attack. That's the best way to describe it. That kind of triggered me going back to see my doctor, yes. Because the same set of circumstances were still there, that I just felt that my legs were full of lead. I wasn't achieving the times that I wanted to achieve, and I was getting left behind with my friends, which was really annoying.
We'll look at your records later in your evidence when we deal with issues about the accuracy of what's recorded in there. But what do you recall happened when you went back to your GP on this next occasion?
Much the same thing was said, that you know, I was probably training too hard, and that I was probably, you know, burning my candle at both ends a bit too much, and that I should sort of slow down with that. More tests were done, blood pressures and such like. And I remember saying, you know, we should maybe run further tests. And I said, I can't remember what I said. And that's all my recollection was, that I felt there was something wrong with me. I knew there was something not quite right. And I said, okay, well, whatever you think.
And your statement explains that she took some bloods for testing, but you
Yes.
weren't sure what the tests were going to be.
No.
What information was then given to you by the GP about the results of the blood test?
I was brought in, I can't remember how many days or weeks later, and told that I was hepatitis C positive.
What can you recall of your reaction, first of all?
I was a bit in shock, a bit sort of speechless, which is unlike me, and slightly out of kilter with what is this thing that I've got. Not quite sure what it was. I hadn't really a clue. I'd never heard of it before. I'd kind of heard of hepatitis, you know, I believe it was all to do with maybe people travelling to India and coming back a bit yellow, but I didn't know anything about it. It was a kind of stereotypical knowledge base of what hepatitis was, that it was, you know, you got it on the hippie trail to Afghanistan and India if you went there, and came back a bit yellow and recovered from it.
And you say in your statement that you recall the GP asking you questions about IV drug use.
Yes, yeah, I was kind of taken aback by that as well. It didn't bother me, but yes, there was a kind of, you know, overemphasis on the questioning regarding have I taken intravenous drugs before, or any other kind of drugs before? Have I ever injected drugs before? Are you sure you haven't done this before? And there was just no way that I'd done that. Yeah.
Was the GP in a position to did she give you information and advice about your condition and about hepatitis C and its prognosis or the risks of infecting others?
No, to be fair, you know, looking back at it now, it was new to even doctors, and I think we were both in the same kind of situation, that we didn't know anything about it really.
You were referred to a consultant.
Yes.
At the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, but it took some months before you recall seeing that consultant.
Yes, it took a while. It seemed like a lifetime, yeah.
And what did he tell you?
He said that I had a very serious condition that would affect the quality of my life if it got any worse, and that it would probably lead to some serious complicated health conditions. Cirrhosis was one of them, and he also said you can get that from drinking as well, but it's the main sort of victim of hepatitis C was deterioration in liver function, and leading to cirrhosis and hepatocellular carcinoma. All these words were thrown at me. I was only 18, 19. I was completely confused and dazed. I thought I was going to die within the next few months. He didn't seem to say anything about that. I was worried about my family and obviously my life ahead of me. So.
And in the years that followed, prior to the first course of treatment that you underwent, what were the physical symptoms that you experienced?
Prior to treatment, I suppose it was, again, a very adverse reaction to alcohol. So my alcohol intake dropped significantly and stopped. I felt that the energy levels were really, really low. Moods as well were quite low because I wasn't getting out doing what I wanted to do. And I think, I do believe at that time it might have been more anxiety and stress and fear of the unknown that was probably affecting me more than the actual disease was. Once I came to terms with it, once I found out more about it, once I sort of managed to grab the beast with, with both hands and confront it and learn about how it behaved and what I could do to benefit myself in the fighting of this disease, I seemed to feel that I got some control back in my life and started to train again.
Now,
not as well as I did, but...
Your liver, however, continued to deteriorate, and there came a point in 2005 when you were advised to start treatment.
Yes, yeah, up until that point I was doing everything I could with my own resources to improve my health and my liver, but that clearly wasn't working. So the consultant said, you should really seriously be thinking of possible treatment regimes, and went through those treatment regimes with me and said that my liver was getting to a point of cirrhotic and, compensated.
And what was the first course of treatment that you underwent?
It felt a bit like being napalmed from the inside out. It was a combination of alpha interferon and ribavirin. That was subcutaneous injections put into my stomach. I had to do it myself, kept in the fridge. Every 3 days you would inject yourself into the stomach with alpha interferon and take ribavirin every day, and then life deteriorated rapidly.
And how long did that course of treatment last?
It felt like an eternity, but it was 48 weeks.
Now, you said in your statement you were warned of the side effects, or that there would be side effects.
Yes.
But the reality of the side effects was horrific.
Yes, yeah, it was completely inconsistent with what I'd been told to expect.
And what kind of side effects did you experience?
Well, I mean, I think emotionally I felt that I'd been taken over by Genghis Khan on steroids with permanent toothache. It was like a one-person Mongol horde. My ability to stay calm and relaxed had gone. I was very irritable. I was very aggressive and quite angry. Not with my family or my partner, but just with life in general. And some of the worst things were the suicidal thoughts. And my body came out on suppurating pustules and blisters, which got infected. I didn't really want to meet anyone because my face was covered in horrific boils. And I had insomnia, I couldn't sleep. Sleep deprivation was obviously affecting me emotionally as well. And my skin was just unbelievable itchy. I couldn't sleep because of that. I remember going out in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning because I had to wear gloves in bed to stop me scratching and knocking the boils, the heads off the boils, and actually standing at the garden shed under the tree in the garden with a bare back, rubbing my back against the shed because it was a dry shed with wood and it felt really great on my, and I thought, well, I'm not scratching, am I? And, you know, thinking if the neighbours saw me right now, they would probably definitely think there was a full moon out somewhere. But it was that kind of desperation, and obviously just had no energy. I was cold all the time, even through the summer. I had to go to bed with all my clothes on. I just shivered and shook all the time. It was just horrendous.
And did that treatment clear the virus?
No.
You said in your statement that you felt the stigma of the disease greatly and that your mental health was affected particularly badly during and following the treatment.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
I suppose, you know, going right to the nub of the whole issue was the kind of homicidal and suicidal thoughts. I felt the world was against me. I just wanted to felt like ripping heads off of people that I came across that irritated me. And I tried to sort of rationalise those kind of feelings and thoughts because I'm not an aggressive person. But, you know, he turned into something that was just horrific. I didn't really like myself much. And I thought I was putting my family through hell. So I embarked on a sort of programme of how best to kill himself.
Were you able to access mental health services or psychological support or counselling during that time?
No.
Do you think that would have helped?
On reflection, definitely. But being probably a Scottish male and not willing to admit defeat, I didn't really think. I thought I could manage it myself, and if I couldn't, then I'd just disappear.
And you've said in your statement that the treatment and the infection had turned you from a fun-loving and gregarious person to someone who just wanted to lock himself away in isolation.
Yeah, without a doubt, yeah. Suffice to say, I'm back to that fun-loving, gregarious person. But at the time, I didn't want to have contact with much, really.
It was a number of years, into 2013, before you had a second course of treatment. How was your physical and mental health in the years between those two courses of treatment?
Yes, I think I'd done a really good job, well, certainly my family had, in helping me to recover. And again, I turned to fitness and exercise and, you know, climbing mountains, getting out in the Scottish hills, and I had the opportunity to go and work in Nepal as a mountain guide for a while. My fitness improved. My health, my own personal health management systems were great. My food intake was good. My drinking had stopped. You know, so I was in quite a good position and felt ready for the next onslaught, if it was an onslaught, but positive in the fact that it was presented as a much better chance of curing this bloody disease than the first lot of treatment.
And so the second course that you embarked upon was triple therapy in 2013.
That's right, yes.
What side effects did you experience in the second course?
In some way, they were very similar to the first lot of treatment, but much more intensive psychological effects, which was hard to imagine, really. Never having had any kind of emotional or psychological problems in my life before, other than the ones that everyone has. during the course of their journey through life. It was just like Dante's hell, first circle of limbo. I felt nothing. I felt like a nothing person. I felt what's happening here is going the same way as the first lot of treatment, but I must keep going, and I must try and complete the course.
And did you receive in that second course of treatment any psychological support or access to mental health services of any kind?
It was, to be fair, in terms of a managed clinical network, mentioned to me with the nurse specialist and the professor. But it was kind of said that that's there if you need it. And I probably just needed somebody to say to me, you're coming and you're going to have it, rather than me deciding whether I needed it or not. I wasn't macho, but there was that kind of, I can get through this myself.
Now, that second course of treatment stopped after 36 weeks.
Yes.
Why was that?
The deterioration in the white blood cells and the platelets and my hemoglobin, the counts were worryingly low, and the professor said, I had a week's holiday from it to see if things would recover, but they didn't, and they were deteriorating rapidly, so I was taken off it. The treatment was stopped.
And it was then in 2016 that you embarked upon a third course of treatment, this time with Harvoni.
Yes.
How was that, first of all, in terms of side effects?
Fantastic. Very little side effects. Headaches, a bit of nausea, a bit of anorexia, being put off your food a bit. I was still going out on my bike. I was still managing to, my wife and I have a small farm that we work, so I was still managing to get out and do the kind of heavy labour during that course of that drug. I certainly couldn't have done that with the other two treatments. So it was good compared to the other treatments. It was a breeze, it was a doddle, a walk in the park.
And what was the outcome of that third course of treatment in terms of the virus?
Cured.
But you've been left with damage to your liver.
Yes.
Cirrhosis.
Yes.
Portal hypertension.
Yes.
An enlarged spleen.
Yes.
Esophageal varices.
Yes.
And also some cardiac problems.
Yes.
And do you know whether those cardiac problems bear any relationship with the treatment that you underwent?
The cardiologist said they were probably, because it was an isolated sort of minor chronic heart condition. There was some plaque and calcification in my my left anterior descending, and because it was isolated, if it had been coronary heart disease, generally speaking, he said, it would have been little parts all over the heart, but it was in one specific area that would suggest a damage to that area somehow. And he did allude to the fact that it could have been to do with extrahepatic manifestations of hepatitis C and the treatment and interferon. There was no, I've never smoked in my life. There's no history of heart disease, and I've been sporty and healthy all my days, so the chance of it being related to something congenital was low, and he said it was probably a result of some extrahepatic manifestation.
You said in your statement that you feel that you live under a constant threat of cancer. That's something that preys on your mind.
Yes.
And you're called the miracle man at hospital, and that worries you. What can you tell us about that?
I know I'm certainly not a miracle man, but I was at the hospital just the other day, and in fact I met Bruce, and the nurse specialist had said that I am an anomaly. I prefer that one rather than miracle man. I seem to survive, and I think due to the good offices of the National Health Service, that I'm monitored regularly and everything's, you know, kept vigilant on any developments. I have 4 groups of lesions in the top left-hand side of my lobe of my liver, which they're worried about, but they don't think they're malignant at this moment. But you know, obviously they're going to they're monitoring that and keeping an eye on that, which is good. And the esophageal banding has stopped, so I still get monitored for varices in the esophagus due to the portal hypertension from the deteriorating liver. It gives up kind of back pressure, if you like, on the esophagus, and it makes your blood vessels come into your esophagus like varicose veins. So they band them, they fire microscopic elastic bands at them and strangle them. And, you know, hopefully that's, you know, abated since the hepatitis C virus has gone. But my liver is still cirrhotic, but it's, touch wood, it's not getting any worse, other than just general aging, because I'm not abusing it in any way. But it is getting, you know, slowly but surely worse. And they don't really know how long, you know, it will be before it goes into decompensation. I don't think the sophistication of monitoring equipment can tell you that. All they can do is keep monitoring your blood, see how your liver's functioning, see how your alkaline phosphate is, see how your, you know, your ALTs are doing and your liver functions are doing, and that's a better indicator than anything. And at the moment, mine are going well. So.
And how often are you monitored?
I seem to be probably taking up residence in hospitals, and I'm sure most of my patient colleagues here feel the same sometimes. This has been the best period for about 20 years. I go 6 monthly for the main checkup, which I just had 2 days ago. I go every 6 months for an ultrasound, and then I go every 6 months for an MRI scan for the lesions in my liver, and then I go for other bits and pieces of related conditions. The most recent one is I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis in the lower 5 lumbar of my spine and osteopenia in my hips, so I'm going to get checked out for that on a regular basis as well to see if that's deteriorating, because I'm beginning to get back problems and such like.
And in terms of your mental health, how has that been since the virus cleared following the 3rd course of treatment?
I think it's been absolutely wonderful, because just knowing that I haven't got that bloody virus is fantastic. And it allows me to have a much clearer head and mind about what lies ahead of me, and that I have got a lot of positivity to look forward to.
You say in your statement, that, however, that you do still think about the infection, and you've thought about it every day of your life since you were diagnosed.
Yes. I think, you know, I do think about it all the time, and how unlucky I have been, but also at the same time how lucky I've been to clear the virus thanks to the NHS.
Did you feel able to tell people of your diagnosis?
It was very difficult in the early stages, early doors of the disease. There was a lot of stigma around. I had to protect my children at nursery and at school, so there was a lot of kind of secrecy above it. It was a kind of, you know, social disease as well. You didn't want to be telling too many people. It was unfortunately, you know, sidelined into a kind of druggy disease, and that carried with it, unfortunately, lots of stigma and negativity. I did worry about job interviews and whether I should be upfront with my employers, which I was, and explain to them. So I felt that, you know, part of that was part of the education and my campaigning work on hepatitis C since I've been diagnosed. I've been an active campaigner, just making public more aware that this disease affects everyone. It's not just, and it can't just be sidelined into a a disease that only affects one section of society. It's all of society's disease, and we need to treat it in that way and approach it in that way.
What was the impact of the illness, the infection and the treatment you received for it and the consequences you've described on your family, your wife and children, your family life?
I can't believe this. My wife still wants to be with me. Horrific, really, especially for my partner and my wife.
Sorry, can we just stop the live transmission for a moment?
Oh, right. Mrs. X, sorry.
Yes, Mrs. X. So we'll stop it, and then if you just wait for a moment, Mr. X will start again.
I feel like a James Bond movie.
Okay. And we'll start again. I was asking you about the impact on your wife and on your children and on your family life.
Yes. I think the impact it has had on Mrs. X has been horrific. She's had to take the burden of my illness as much as I have. And that's been really difficult. But amazing that she's coped with it. And I definitely don't think I'd be here without her.
And your children, one of your children, your eldest child, again, we won't mention any names.
Oh, yes.
Had-
Daughter X.
Yes. During your first course of treatment in particular, went through a difficult time.
Yes, yeah, quite a rebel without a cause, or maybe she did have a cause. Seeing her dad sort of deteriorate. And possibly not at the age of fully being able to comprehend or understand what was happening. It was probably one of the few times that my wife and I disagreed on how to approach this. She felt that we should be telling Daughter X all about it, and I was more of the opinion that we shouldn't, to protect her. But she was told, because she was 15, 16, so she was mature enough to understand the whole disease and the progression of the disease and what it could do and what I had to do to try and stop it killing me by taking treatment and what the treatment made me do. And it was that time, adolescence, at school, and got in with the wrong crowd and it became quite difficult and unmanageable. And I think probably because of displacement of what she saw me go through, perhaps.
What about the impact of your infection and your treatment and the symptoms and side effects on your employment and your career development? Again, without mentioning any particular employers.
Yes. Yeah, I was fortunate to have employment, consistent employment with the one X organisation for 30 years, and they understood fully about that. And I was upfront with them about all my treatment and issues that related to the disease and the disease progression. I think what it did do during the course of that employment and my working life, I was with that organisation for 30 years. It kind of, I suppose it put a bit of a damper on any kind of aspirational career development. I just felt I didn't want to risk putting myself through more stress by getting promotion and going up the kind of ladder of promotional ladder, as I say. So I suppose my aspirations and my enthusiasm to get more money, to earn more salary, to do all that was put on hold, was stopped. I just didn't feel that I could do that. And I felt that, if I did get that kind of, career development, that kind of promotion, that I might die in the middle of it all, and that would be sad for my work, as well as me and my family, of course. But yeah, I think there was a bit of a damp squib on my career opportunities. And I worked at different ways, but yeah, in terms of professional career development, it didn't rest easily with me to do that while I was infected.
Can I ask you about access to dental care? Did you experience any difficulties in accessing dental care?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I had, again, another long-term relationship with my dentist. It was my wife and my children that seemed to have the problem more than I did with that, because my wife sort of was up front to the dentist that her husband had hepatitis C, and their approach was that, well, we'll make appointments for you and the children at the end of the day, so we don't have to autoclave and clean up so much through the day. And it makes no sense to me, because there could be somebody in the surgery at 9 o'clock that was hepatitis C positive that they didn't know was hepatitis C positive. So there was issues with dentistry, and I've kind of pursued that one. It's been a bit of a bugbear of mine through the campaign work and through the educational work that I've been doing with Hep C, that I think we need to address more issues relating to dentistry as possible sources and routes of transmission, particularly for people who have no idea how they got hepatitis C. Because when you think of dentistry, you think of high pressure, high speed sort of equipment that goes in the mouth with the sensitive gums. Gums bleed easily. There's tissue in the drill heads. There's tissue in the sort of tool heads as well. And if they're not autoclaved correctly, then that is a possible serious route of transmission that I think as a society we haven't really sort of looked into enough.
You've also been involved, I understand, with your consent, in a number of medical research projects.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And what was the purpose of your involvement in those?
I suppose altruistically to try and make it better for others that followed me with hepatitis C. And maybe to make it better for me as well. But I'll not know that until 5 years down the line when the research is complete. I've been involved in 3 or 4 different guinea pig trials. So.
Now, you've referred to your campaigning work, and you were involved in the establishment of a hepatitis C support group. The particular aspect of that you address in your statement was involvement in the Lord Ross expert group.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, what the work entailed?
Yes. We had set up the support group, and we'd then linked up with other similar support groups throughout the Central Belt in Glasgow and Fife, and felt that there was issues that needed to be addressed from a strategic and legislative and political and policy kind of aspect. And we lobbied the Health Minister at the time, Malcolm Chisholm, to try and give us some sort of stage or floor space to be able to deal with the many issues that still exist with hepatitis C, as a means of looking at those that were infected through blood and blood products through NHS procedures, and to try and support them as best we could in their life's journey and in their deterioration, because they had hepatitis C, and at that point there was no cure for it, and people knew that the treatment was pretty low in terms of cure. It was 40% at the time. So the long and the short of that was that Malcolm Chisholm decided to set up the expert group, which was chaired by Lord Ross, and I was asked to be on that group.
And we've got some of the recommendations that you've exhibited to your witness statement. Paul, it's 2137003, please. We see it's report of the expert group on financial and other support, March 2003.
Yes.
We turn to the next page, please, Paul. There are a number of recommendations that you've identified and mentioned in terms of recommendations that you thought important that hadn't been fully implemented or implemented in some respects at all. And I understand the first recommendation that you wanted to draw attention to is recommendation 1C. which was the
Yes.
recommendation that those who subsequently suffer serious deterioration in their physical condition because of their hepatitis C infection, cirrhosis, liver cancer, other similar serious conditions, should be entitled to full compensation calculated on the same basis as common law damages.
Yes.
That was one of the recommendations that was made but not adopted, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, in a general sense, I do believe that if the recommendations, from Lord Ross were implemented, we might not be here today, because I think that there's a lot of good in that. I mean, it was a long time ago. But yes, certainly one of the key ones, C, has not been implemented.
And if we go to the next page, please, Paul, recommendation 2.
Well, it's all up here, right?
You've drawn attention my attention to recommendations 2A, access to understandable information
Yes.
on HCV, B, counselling services, D, advice and assistance in securing appropriate and adequate assurance and insurance, and F, improved access to palliative care and symptom management services when appropriate. And I understand your view is that those are all important recommendations that haven't been implemented or fully implemented.
Yeah, fully, yes. Yes, I do believe that, yes.
And then you also, I understand, wanted to draw attention, next page please, Paul, recommendation 4D, funding for AVMA to open a Scottish branch.
Yes, that was agreed as well. That hasn't happened, yes. It was Association of Victims of Medical Accidents, and it was agreed that there would be a branch set up in Scotland because they had a lot of good case study and track record and positivity about what they'd done for patients in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and that they would be offered to open a branch in Scotland.
And then the more general concern that you've expressed in your witness statement was that following the work of the expert group and the recommendations of Lord Ross, the issue was, in terms of financial payments at least, was devolved back to Westminster and resulted in the establishment of the Skipton Fund.
That's correct, yes.
Now, I wanted to ask you next about your own experiences with the Skipton Fund, because you made an application to the Skipton Fund, which was unsuccessful.
That's correct, yes.
We're going to look at some of the documents. Paul, could we have up on screen, please, document 2137016? This is the application form you submitted in December 2004. And if we look just over halfway down the page, we can see in bold print, all the rest of the form after page 2 must be completed by a medical professional to whom you should give the form after you've completed and signed the first 2 pages. You should also give these guidance notes to that medical professional. And so your form, the bulk of it, was completed in accordance with that guidance by your GP.
That's right.
And if we turn to, Paul, it's the 5th page of this, should be, part 4B, we can see the last question on that page. The GP is asked, in your view, is it probable that the infected person's HCV infection was acquired in consequence of NHS treatment received before the 1st of September 1991? The answer there is yes. So your GP completed the form setting out his view that it was probable that your infection was the consequence of NHS treatment pre-September 91.
Yes.
If we then, please, Paul, have 2137017, we can see the letter that your GP wrote in support of your application, and he refers to the surgery that you underwent in 1976.
Yeah.
And then in the paragraph, the 4th paragraph down, he refers to you remembering the receipt of 3 units of blood, and he refers to your mother backing that up, writing a letter to this effect and enclosing a copy of your mother's letter.
Yes.
And if we have the next page, please, of this exhibit, we can see there the letter that your mother wrote. It's not completely easy to read, but she says this: I remember that due to a minor complication, he was given some blood during this procedure. I also remember that as a joke between the nursing staff and my son, and then she describes you putting on an accent as they told you that you had blood that came from America. So that was your mother's independent recollection. She set that out in this letter. Your GP provided that to go to the Skipton Fund in support of your application.
Yes.
And if we go back to the first page of this exhibit, please, Paul, to the letter from the GP, we see in the last two paragraphs, he explains your efforts to obtain further information in terms of any contemporaneous records. And then the GP concludes, it does strike me that his mother's written memory of the blood transfusion at the time of the inguinal hernia repair, Mr. X's memory of the blood transfusion and the documentation relating to the surgery are at least reasonably supportive evidence towards ascertaining the infecting event. Before I ask you the next question, one more document, 2137018. We can see here, this was your attempt to obtain hospital records, and you were told, unfortunately, after a thorough search, I'm sorry to inform you that we do not hold any records for you. And that was from the Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary.
Yeah, and I also had many other requests for my records from various other GP practices that I'd attended, and they also came back saying there was no records held for me.
And you provided those documents to the Skipton
Yes.
Fund in support of your application?
Yeah.
What was the outcome of the application?
I was not awarded the Skipton Fund.
And if we have up on screen 2137019, we can see a letter the 2nd of March 2005. This is after your application's been rejected. And we can see that because it's an acceptance of the fact that you want to appeal. And the third paragraph tells us that the Department of Health is currently working on the establishment of the Independent Appeals Panel. I've been advised that this may take a few months. When this work is completed, we'll write to notify you accordingly. So that was March 2005. And then if we have up on screen 2137020, please, Paul. We can see that you then received a letter 19th of September 2006, so approximately 18 months later, telling you that the Independent Appeal Panel had now been established.
Yes.
We'll begin to consider cases from the 3rd of October. You're told that who's going to be on the panel, be dealt with in writing, and then that a maximum of 30 cases will be reviewed at the first meeting.
Yeah.
If we then have up on screen, please, 2137021, you put in some further information in support of your application, and we can see from the second paragraph of this document the basis upon which your application had been refused. It was refused on the grounds, sorry, Paul, it's just above that. Skipton Fund application 20th of December 2004, refused on grounds of medical records do not confirm that blood product was administered. We can see that towards the top of the page.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit lost here.
Yeah. Paul, could we have highlighted it's the second section, Skipton Fund application refused. Just,
on the correct,
thank you. Yes.
Yes, got you.
So that was the ground of refusal, that your medical records do not confirm that blood product was administered. And the reality was you had no medical records other than the discharge letter.
Just the discharge letter, yes.
Because those records had been lost or destroyed.
Yes, correct.
And then you pointed that out. No medical records relating to this incident and attempts to locate them had been unsuccessful, and you refer to the efforts you'd made. And then you referred to your GP and your GP's view about the probability of the cause of infection. If we then have up on screen, please, Paul, 2137022, you got a further letter from the Skipton Fund dated the 17th of October 2006, and the appeal panel asked for further information. They wanted evidence from your GP, how the letter of the 14th of June 76, that's the discharge letter, came to be written on.
Yeah.
Wanted hospital records to be followed up, wanted to know more about the procedure, asked you how you knew it was 3 units, exactly who said blood was from the USA. Please give as much detail as possible of that conversation. And then if we look at 2137023, we will see you gave over the course of 2 pages as full an account as you could. You referred in the 3rd paragraph to your attempts to find your medical files. You then referred to your own memory about being told about the 3 units of blood and your recollection of the exchanges with the nurses. You refer at the bottom of the page, if we can look at the last paragraph, thanks Paul, the surgeon told you that they'd had to give you blood, and you say, I was a young lad of only 18, I didn't think to ask anymore. And then you then refer to, in the 2nd paragraph of that 2nd page, your mother witnessing it and the banter, and to the letter that was written by your mother, who by then had died. And you gave further detail about the circumstances in which you were kept in hospital and so on. And then if we turn finally to 2137024, please, Paul, we can see the response that you received, dated the 1st of December 2006. If we go towards the bottom of that page, please. In order to succeed on an appeal, the appellant must satisfy the panel that it is probable, that is more likely than not, that the infection with hepatitis C was indeed caused either directly through NHS treatment before the 1st of September 1991 or indirectly by contact with a person who was so infected. In order to be satisfied that this is the case, the panel will pay particular attention to the treatment records of the person concerned. And then it says that your appeal was considered by the panel at its meeting on the 1st of December. And then if we go over the page, please, we see the panel's decision. The panel reviewed the entire file of papers held by the Skipton Fund, including the additional information supplied for the purpose of the appeal. We noted that there were no records of any transfusion and that it was not likely that a transfusion would have been administered for the condition for which you were treated. There was a discharge summary on your leaving hospital that would have mentioned a transfusion had it occurred. And that was the sum total of the explanation that you were given for rejecting the account you put forward in support of your appeal.
Yes, yes.
You observe in your witness statement that the way in which your application was dealt with was contrary to what you understood had been intended when the scheme was established.
Yes.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes, I can. I think there was great expectations from the Lord Ross expert group that people who were infected through NHS procedures would get their day and be compensated or given an ex gratia payment or whatever you want to call it for the pain and suffering that they felt and continue to feel today, those that are still alive, that is. It then turned completely on its head, and I'm not quite sure why that is. I would probably really like to know why. But the minister at the time, Malcolm Chisholm, in the setting up of a fund, it was a devolved responsibility for NHS Scotland through the Scotland Act and the Parliament to be able to deal with the setting up of our own Scottish-based fund. There was nothing to stop that happening, but unbeknown and for whatever reasons I'm not quite sure about, that was then re-devolved back down to Westminster, and I'm not entirely sure why, because it would make it much more appropriate for Scottish patients to have their own, Skipton type fund based in Scotland, where people from Scotland knew the NHS scene in Scotland better than they would in Westminster. People wouldn't have to, travel so far or whatever it may be at that time. We thought maybe appeals would come in and all sorts of things. And we were dumbfounded, really, as to why it was then re-devolved. A devolved issue was then re-devolved back to Westminster. And I still don't know the answer to that. Speculatively, I was told that it was because Tony Blair had said to Malcolm Chisholm, if you set up your own scheme in Scotland in that kind of progressive way that Scotland does sometimes and give out, payments, we'll be inundated in England and we can't afford it. And John Reid kind of, at the time, was a main mover and shaker in that being that Skipton Fund being brought down to Westminster for its formulation.
And you've said in your statement that what you had understood would be the basis for decision making was that if a doctor who knew the patient confirmed that their view on the balance of probabilities, the infection had been caused by NHS treatment in the relevant period, that would suffice, rather than it being an exercise of discretion on the part of the Skipton Fund.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that was something. I mean, I was, along with Philip Dolan, who sadly is no longer with us, we were the patient representatives that travelled to London to meet the Department of Health, along with Scottish Office officials, Scottish Office at the time officials, to have an influence on how that Skipton Fund would, what the criteria would be, what the questioning would be, what the sort of protocols would be, basically to help set it up. We insisted that if it wasn't happening in Scotland, we had to have some sort of input to that. It would only been fair to do so. So we went down to London several times, and along with Charles Goer, who was also a patient rep from the Hepatitis C Trust in London, we argued vociferously for that clause to be put in. The Home Office officials, the Department of Health officials, were very against it. I'm not sure why, but we had to fight tooth and nail to make sure that, in the balance of probabilities, along with the absence of any of medical records being lost or destroyed, and with the authorisation of a medical professional that knew the patient well, that her or his signature would be suffice enough to say that in the balance of probabilities, the most likely route of infection was through NHS procedures, that should automatically trigger the payment. Because the Skipton Fund, and again, this is something that we were very, very clear about, that the Skipton Fund was a non-discretionary sort of fund. So that would trigger an instant payment. And it turns out that the Skipton Fund was a very discretionary fund. So it failed in its protocols, it failed in its set-up procedures and processes, failed miserably in being a non-discretionary fund. It seemed to take a lot, as patients have probably said up and down the country at various inquiries and reviews, that they were treated unfairly and inconsistently unfairly, with the Skipton Fund being far too discretionary and not a non-discretionary fund as it was originally intended to be and agreed upon.
Your appeal having been rejected by the Skipton Fund in the documents we've seen in late 2006, did you ever attempt to try again to make an application to them, or have you subsequently sought to make any application to the current Scottish scheme?
No. I've no intention to either. I've had enough.
Now, the last issue that I wanted to explore with you is the question of the accuracy of your medical records. And this is in relation to your GP records. You obtained a number of your GP records in 2002. And what did you find when you looked at those records?
I found glaring concerns of inaccuracy, and I was quite taken aback by what I read, and not knowing that had been in my records until then. I suppose gobsmacked, really.
You found references to a former sexual partner with hepatitis C, and you found references to intravenous drug use.
Yes, I did.
What's your response? We'll look at a handful of the documents, but what's your response to the accuracy or otherwise of those entries?
I'm trying to think through all this, again, flummoxed completely by it. There were some kernels of truth, some little grains of truth in that I can explain, that I was present at in a flat that I had a room in with 2 medical students who were intravenous drug users and regularly used intravenous drugs. And perhaps at some point I had mentioned that to my GP or my consultant or whatever, and I don't know how that then got translated into, factual statements about what I said that I partook in that. I mean, it was quite gobsmacking, really. And when I looked at the records and tried to then marry up dates and times, there was other inaccuracies that came to light as well, not just about that, but about the status of my wife and my children, about dates getting mixed up, about the age I was when I went to various places, about when I allegedly had tried intravenous drugs, that the sexual partner was hepatitis C positive, which she never was, in terms of she was a landlady. That was it, no more, no less. And I then felt that I needed to do something about that. So I embarked on a personal crusade to right what I felt was wrongs.
And we won't look at all the documents because you've given a very detailed account in your supplemental witness statement of what you say are errors in the records. You've identified, for example, it being said that your partner was pregnant when she wasn't. You've identified it being said that you had 1 child when you had 2, that you had a baby when your children were older than that, and so on.
Yes, it was just a bit of a dog's breakfast in terms of factual accuracy.
And we can see that in 2003, you wrote to one of your consultants about inaccuracies. Could we have up on the screen, please, 2137005? And we can see that your letter is headed Inaccuracies in Personal Health File, and you explain that you've been pursuing the above issue for some time because it had come to my attention whilst looking at my medical file that there were some very worrying inaccuracies and value judgments made about my life and personal integrity. And you refer to amending these inaccuracies with Dr. Dobson. That was your then new GP, and have signed and dated them. And you asked about your hospital records because you wanted to ensure that those accurately and clearly reflected the correct position. Is that right?
That's right. Could I just point a clarification, Jenny? What did you say about Dr. Dobson? He was the GP with whom you looked at the records in 2002. Yes, sorry, that's correct.
Not the GP who you say made the inaccurate records in the late 1990s.
You did say his then new GP.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yes.
And
that's what confused me about the new part. Yes. Sorry about that.
No, my apologies, Mr. X. And then, if we just have up on the screen, please, 2137006. We can see you then writing the following year, August 2004, to Dr. Dobson, and you're asking for his confirmation whether your amended records agreed in August 2003 have been communicated to Professor Hayes, because it would appear that they've not yet been amended in my Royal Infirmary file. And you say this: it's of the utmost importance to me that all my records are consistent and reflect accurately my medical history, as this is crucial to future medical intervention, my own peace of mind, and for the consistency and credibility of the NHS and its management of sensitive and personal information. And then we'll just look at perhaps one of the examples of the records that you've provided to the inquiry, Mr. X. Paul, can we have 2137007? We can see here an entry in your GP records for the 3rd of December 1996. And we can see it says there, inquired re risks of Hep C, previous partner has it, will check Hep C status in future if decides.
Oh, right.
So just pausing there, that's an entry made by your then GP in 1996. And then if we look to the side, we see written on the side with the date of the 25th of November 2002, never had sexual intercourse, SI, with lady concerned, never used IVDs, intravenous drugs.
Yes.
Now, can you just tell us how that handwritten entry on the left came to be added to your records?
Yes, it was in consultation and discussion with my doctor, Dobson. I mean, I think just to be clear that this was a medical practice, and one wasn't specifically my GP, and one wasn't a new one or an old one. They were all part of the same practice. And I got a junior GP, a registered doctor, quite a lot of the time. But my main, the main senior practitioner was Dr. Dobson. And I went directly to him to say, I'm not happy about what has been written about me. And, what can I do about that? I've nothing to hide in terms of it remaining on my records, what the other GP's interpretation of what I said was, but I want to put my side on the records so that if anyone comes to look at it, there is at least two, approaches to how we perceived what had happened. And he agreed to that, and that's how he has written the amendments on the side of this document.
And he and you have gone through the handful of other letters or documents in your GP records which contain what you have said are inaccurate references either to IV drug use or to a previous partner who was in fact a landlady.
And information about my children and wife and dates.
And you and Dr. Dobson have essentially annotated those records back in 2002 to say that they're not correct in a similar form to the annotation we see here.
That's correct, yes.
And what you've said about it in your statement, Mr. X, is this: these inaccuracies in my medical records are concerning to me. I've made a number of efforts to have them rectified over the years. I've never had sexual intercourse with anyone with hepatitis C to my knowledge. I've never used intravenous drugs. I do not know of any way I could have contracted hepatitis C other than the blood transfusion which I had in 1976. I can only assume that there was some discussion around the time of my diagnosis with hepatitis C of my knowledge of the condition and of people who had it, as well as my knowledge of and connection to intravenous drug use. It seems that the doctors with whom I spoke have misunderstood me when I've spoken to them about this. This has led to the inaccuracies in my records. They've made other errors in my records. I'm concerned about the inaccuracies. I'm concerned that they suggest that these doctors and any other medical professionals who've read my notes over the years have assumed or thought that I had contracted hepatitis C by IV drug use or by sexual contact with someone who was infected. This is not the case. I have tried to have these issues resolved over many years, but have been unable to do so.
That's correct.
And all you've been able to achieve effectively is the annotations that we've seen that your GP made in 2002.
Yes.
To set out what you say is the correct position.
That's correct. Yeah.
Mr. X, those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything further you would like to say?
Yeah. There is. I think a lot of this, particularly the last, let's look at the last one, and I think if I had to do anything, would be to try and make sense of the complexity and the quagmire of individuals' medical records, because the GP have got medical records of the individual, the hospitals that you may have attended have got different set of records, and they need to be brought together into the one sort of coherent medical record, because the medical record of an individual from birth to death is crucially important to that individual and their families and the treatment they receive from our wonderful and glorious NHS. And you can see just by what I've highlighted in some of the inaccuracies that there maybe needs to be a look at the value judgments sometimes made, or clarification on some of the statements that are made so that it's signed by both the patient and the GP, or maybe we have to go to the Women's World Cup and go for video-assisted GP counselling. I don't know. But there needs to be some bringing together of very sensitive data, very important data, so that that can be accessed and retrieved at the press of a button. Now, to me, who is not very IT minded, I do know how to work a computer, but it seems to me that that shouldn't be that difficult to do, particularly when you see companies that can change your electricity in days, minutes. I mean, you think it would be easy enough to get the data onto the one system that the NHS could then manage on your behalf, and that could be regularly checked by you with an access code and a PIN number, so that if anything did come up and you had been to the doctors and then the next day you wanted to have a look at what she or he said, you could easily go into that with your code or your national insurance number or whatever it may be, look at that and say, yeah, that's accurate, I'm happy with that. And I think, it'd be one of the things that I'd like to say about, future, work of people's medical files. And then we wouldn't be here discussing who said what, why, when and where, what was inaccurate, what was true, what wasn't true. It would be something that I've used to highlight the need for this to happen in future.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
There are a few things. We have mentioned a lot on the Lord Ross report, and I welcome that. There's just a couple of things I'd want to sort of re-emphasise about palliative care, that people that have been infected through NHS procedures, we will deteriorate. We will, even though I have been cured, I will deteriorate, significantly more than if I had a healthy liver. There's no doubt about that. And the burden that could put on families and spouses and friends is enormous. And I think there needs to be a look at particular palliative care for people in those categories when they reach the stage of, decompensated liver and heading towards a transplant or heading towards death or hepatocellular carcinoma, whatever that may be. Liver dysfunction, end-stage liver disease is a very slow, painful, enduring death, and I think palliative care needs to be looked at in relation to that for those people. And it was something that Lord Ross mentioned, but I would just like to sort of re-emphasise that. And also on treatment, I think we have something very important here. We have new cases presenting themselves. We are treating very small amounts of people, in terms of hepatitis C prevention. That does break the cycle, but mutation potential is possible if we don't hit that hard and quickly. It could create very quickly a new genotype or a resistant strain, and we all know the outcomes of what that could be. We could be back to square one again, and I think we need to look at serious elimination strategy of hepatitis C. It's within our grasp to do that. Scotland government in 2015 committed themselves to an elimination strategy, and that seems to have lost its way a bit. We had the announcement just the other week there with the National Institute for Clinical Excellence in England and a lot of the drug companies that they have signed up to an elimination strategy by the year 2030. So I think we need to do the same. We have the expertise, we have the knowledge, and we have the cure to actually eliminate hepatitis C from our midst. If we approach it the same way as we approached foot and mouth disease, where it was collaborative, it was consensual, it was collective, it was immediate, it was sustained, and it was progressive response to that terrible disease that affected farmers and their beasts, not for one saying that we all get put in a big funeral pyre and burnt, but we have got the ability to eliminate hepatitis C from our society, and I think we need to do that sooner rather than later, or else we'll end up in the same situation 10 years down the line where we're having people represented with hepatitis C. If you don't get rid of the infection pool, you will continue to have hepatitis C, and I think it's something that's within our grasps, and hopefully this inquiry will add to that sort of pressure to do that. I've mentioned dentistry. The one other thing that I would just like to mention to finish up, and to say that I do believe there is a very deep hepatic crack in our society, and those of us who have been infected and then neglected and then dejected fall into that crack. And I think we need to do all we can to ask the right questions to the right people and the right organisations to stop that from happening. As a patient, I would like to say that if people not used to speaking are heard by people not used to listening, then real changes can take place and happen. And I welcome this inquiry for that reason.
I'm just going to ask Mr Dawson and Mr O'Neill if there's anything further they'd like me to ask.
Must be calling Mrs X. He's late.
Mr X, there's just a handful of matters that Mr Dawson asks me to raise with you. Just going back to the operation in 1976.
Yes.
Were you warned preoperatively or told anything about either the possibility of bleeding or of blood transfusion or any risks of infection associated with transfusion?
No, I wasn't, no.
You've told us about the friendly banter that you had with the nurses. Have you subsequently been told anything about blood being taken from Americans in Scotland that might have underpinned that banter?
I mean, yes, actually. I was an outdoor instructor as part of my career, and I was based very near the Dunoon American base in the Cowal Peninsula, and we got to know a lot of the troops that stationed there, and a lot of them, and I read subsequently as well, that it was a big source of donated blood from the American troops there to the Scottish Blood Transfusion Service. So there may be some reference to American accents there and such like, but I do believe that was, up until the point they left, a major source of donated blood.
And then the third question which Mr Dawson asks is whether, is for you to confirm that you were not picked up in terms of the possibility of you being infected on any look-back exercise.
I was not, no.
It came about through your feeling unwell and proactively going to the GP.
Yes, yeah.
And then that leads to the fourth and final question. We looked at the entry for the 3rd of December 1996 in your GP records, which referred to that you might ask to have your hepatitis C status checked in the future if you decided.
Yes.
Did you ever decide or ask to have your hepatitis C status checked?
Never, no. I did not.
And so your testing came about through the description you've given in your first witness statement of the GP telling you that she was going to do some further blood tests. And that was all you knew until you received the diagnosis?
Yes.
Yeah. It looked from the medical notes at the time, if necessary we can put them back up, that the doctor had indicated that you might wish a test. If you wanted it, you could have it. But then the next entry immediately after that, not very clear on the date, but it looks like the very end of 1996, says that you tested, there was a test which was positive, not that you tested, but that your blood had been. I think the next entry is early 97, when it looks as though there may have been some discussion with you.
Mm.
Yes, and Mr X...
That's what the record shows.
It is, and Mr X has made the observation in his supplemental statement in which he's talked about these records that there is nothing which shows him going back and asking for a test, simply the test result itself.
And the way it's written looks as though it might simply be a sample which has then been tested, having been taken earlier.
That's one inference, certainly, sir, yes.
It's a possible interpretation.
Thank you, Mr X. There's nothing further from me.
Well, there's one question, which is more of a correction, I think, than a question, one comment, and then I shall thank you as I usually do. But the question stroke correction is this. On the transcript, as it was typed out, I thought at the time it was what I was hearing, you had said that when you've been told of your diagnosis of hepatitis C, it came as a particular blow because you were 17 or 18 years of age. I don't think that could be right, could it? Because you had your infection in 1976, you were tested in 1997, so it was 38, 39, thereabouts.
Yes, it couldn't have been 17 or 18, yes.
And that's just plainly an error in the transcribing or whatever.
Yeah.
But it needs to be put right, particularly because we must keep records right.
Yeah, I agree.
And the observation is in relation to hepatitis C testing. I understood before this week, and it was confirmed to me during the course of the week by Professor Dillon from Tayside, who is here, one of our experts to the inquiry, that the process of eliminating hepatitis C in Tayside, at any rate, where the target date is 2025, is going well.
Yes, I think if we could all take a leaf out of the Tayside example, we would be one of the world leaders in how we are approaching elimination.
But your evidence gave me the opportunity to say that.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Thank you for your evidence, and in particular your description of what it is like living with this dreadful disease, and for your thoughtful observations upon matters which relate to that and relate to matters we are inquiring into. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break now before the next witness, who again is anonymous, and come back at 12:15.
Thank you, sir.
12:15.